Okay, we're back with another episode of Modus Cafe, and I'm Mercedes. And what's awesome is that I get Steve Bechtel back on this podcast. Hi, Steve.
How are you? It's so good to see you.
Good to see you too. It has been a little while, actually. We were doing quite a few podcasts last year, and this is our first one for 2025.
Yeah, and I'm psyched. It's always so fun to get back and talk with you, and especially because as our ideas change and as we learn new things, we're always emailing back and forth and stuff, but we never actually sit down and take the time to talk like this. So this is really good to share some of the stuff we've been chatting about.
Totally. And I think today what's really interesting, I think for the listeners, you're not going to hear maybe a more structured podcast outline like the rest of our podcasts have been in the past. I think this is going to be maybe some more conversation, and we might be sharing ideas or things that we've noticed from training our clients. But in today's podcast, like what I was hoping for was to talk about periodization or like program length. And this idea kind of came about because one of my clients texted me and said, hey, how long is this program going to be, and when am I going to see a change in the program so that I can get ready for outdoors? And it's just interesting to me that I think some people have a fixed mindset in, if we're doing strength building, that we should really only do it for 6 weeks. And then we're going to move on. And really, the length of program, I think, is dictated on so many different things based on the individual and their experience level and where they're at in the year. So that's my hope today, is that we get to talk about periodization and how it might look depending on who we're training. Do you have any first thoughts on programming and periodization? Where do you want to start?
Yeah, my first thought is that every training program should have a goal. And the training program should end, or that phase should end, when that goal has been attained, instead of an end date on a calendar. Someone commented once, and I can't remember who it is. I love to give credit, but was the question was like, how long are we going to stay with this training program? And the response was, how long do you give a baby to walk? And really, you just give them as long as they need. And you alluded to that, which I think is really important, is the individual variance in our genetic potential, in our age, in our training age or our experience, and then in our actual schedule. All of those things matter a ton. And so if we can correct for all of those things, then we can come up with some really good rules for how much we need to do of any of these given training sessions.
I do think it is a common mistake, especially for novice athletes or folks who are relatively new to training, that they do move on to a next phase too early. And something that I've been thinking about, so I'm currently trying to write my second version of Simple Strength. I'm putting it out there so that I actually get it done this year.
It will be done next Thursday.
In my book writing process, what's been awesome is that I get to do a lot of research. I get to come back to just doing some basic book reading about training. And it's so good to be reminded that the body really, it's going to adapt first neurologically. And I try to remind my clients, but I also have to remind myself that the first 4 to 6 weeks is usually neurological. And then you'll get the bigger tissue adaptations after that. And so if you only give yourself maybe 4 to 6 weeks as a more novice trainee, you're really only making some neurological changes and not capitalizing on those changes. So I think a lot of the people that I tend to work with, it seems like minimum is 8 weeks to even get a grasp of what is happening in that program. And then, yeah, like what you had said in the beginning of this podcast is like, what is the goal? What are you trying to reach? And then change it up. And yeah, so I think that's just a common mistake. And I also make that mistake for myself as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like I tend to get bored too. Like I think there's some maybe personality differences in programs where if you do something too often, you can get super bored and your time, it's time for something else. So let's go. I'm curious how you might, I guess, come up with a program length based on the goal. How do you get your clients to kind of measure their own, like where they're getting or where they're going in the program, and how they know they're kind of like ready to move on? Do you have any tangibles?
Yeah, well, so the boredom is a real thing. So one of the really important aspects of any training is to have some amount of measurement that is visible to the athlete. If in a weight training session, it's really obvious. You go, oh, we were doing 3 sets of 5 at 70 pounds. Now we're doing it at 75 pounds. So you're getting better at moving weight. And then by the end of this, we maybe will be at 90 pounds. And so that's very tangible, but it's important if the athlete can recognize it, to not only acknowledge those weights, but then to occasionally go back and go, oh, here's what my limit felt like at the beginning of this program. And one of the things that we love to do in a personal training setting will be, after about 3 months of training, to just come back in and start out with that athlete's very, very first workout and run them through it. And they'll be like, really? I'm supposed to do 8 reps only at 20 pounds. And they think it's really silly. They can go through it really quickly. They've got better capacity. They're way stronger. And so what was a workout that made them very, very sore is now barely a warm up. And that's just in that short period of time. And somewhere in that 8 to 12 week range, we start to see muscular and metabolic adaptations in addition to the neurological adaptations. But it's really important for people to understand that any progress in that direction is really a good thing. And then if we can build smart training in to maintain that while we're working on something else, then we can really get somewhere with this athlete. The problem for most athletes is, and especially climbing athletes, is they are really focused on performance outcomes. And so it's always about, like, I'm going to go in and try to do the hardest boulder I've ever done. And then I'm going to try to do that again on Thursday, and I'll try to do it again on Sunday. And they may not get enough capacity to actually improve that ability. They may not get stronger because they get so tired from just trying to do hard technical climbing. So being smart with directing them into the little pieces of training is a really important bit of it. And then to have some patience around how long it actually takes to get better at something. Like stamina circuits are something that's really hard for people. They're physically challenging. They're not that pleasant. We always end up, we're getting into fatigue every single time. And to really change the way that you handle being fatigued in climbing, that might take you 12 or 16 or 20 sessions before we see a measurable improvement in those qualities. And if you've done like a set of circuits or linked problems or whatever, and I'm going to ask you to do that 20 sessions in a row, most people are like, yeah, I'm okay not having very good endurance. And so just being able to stay with the training long enough is the big key. And the way that we do that generally is to go climbing and hope that covers most of the bases. And then maybe we can work on some really specific things in the gym. But for the most part, it's hard to become a true athlete when progress becomes difficult.
Yeah. And you just mentioned that athletes might actually have too high of expectations of themselves for hitting certain benchmarks. And I see this especially true for folks who are just looking to increase climbing grade. Like that's maybe their only outcome that they're looking for. Like if that doesn't change, that means the training didn't work.
Yeah.
I think that's like just such a big mistake because, as you mentioned, like you will take folks back to like their first session after 6 or 8 weeks, and they've clearly improved
Yeah.
on these very simple movements that they were first they made you sore, stiff, fatigued, and now they don't
Yeah.
anymore. And that should be, yeah, your kind of your first sign that things are moving in the right direction. um so yeah, I think it's focusing on the smaller wins
Yeah.
generally that might be good.
Well, that's totally, yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And then I think that you can, if you can help an athlete kind of keep track of those things, and understand that is a win, it's super good. I think it's the perceived exertion, and like it's like it's very hard to quantify bouldering. Like if I look back on my old training logs, it's like I'll look at a piece of paper and it's like V4, V6, V4, V5, and it's just a list of V grades, and I'm like, I don't even know what building I was in. I don't know if they were linked together. I don't know if they, I have no idea what happened in that session. And so over time, we've learned to describe the problem and then to also give a reflection on how it felt. And then at the end of the session, maybe a couple of sentences about how it went. Like, oh, I was bouldering with Mercedes, and it was a super fun day. We were at the Minneapolis Bouldering Project, right? And then it'll bring me right back into that, and I can actually revisit even the movement that happened during that time. I'll bring those movement skills I might have learned may come back to me, as opposed to a list of V grades when I'm just like, yeah, I don't have any idea. And so to say, we, V4 attempt, 45-degree compression boulder, Mercedes flashed it, I got it third go. It takes a little bit more time to put that down, but then I can go back 6 months later and say, okay, I can see the volume of work that I did. I can see how quickly I was sending things. I can see how I was reflecting in my mindset, and what does my progress look like there? Because yeah, if I'm just chasing that highest grade, there's only so many grades. And even though you may see this really meteoric rise at the beginning, it levels off really quickly for everybody. Um, like I think the first time I went climbing, we did a 5.6 or something. And then the next day I did a 5.7, and then, maybe a 5.9 a few days later. And I'm like, oh, well, I can't wait to do 5.14 next week. Right. But it all does level off. And so finding those pieces of it that are important to performance, but not performance itself, are really how we keep people on track in training.
Yeah, actually, this is a slight tangent, but you reminded me of your journaling technique about like really putting the details of how things felt
Mm-hmm.
after your session in a journal that you can refer back to, because I think that can actually help you with confidence. So if you remember a really good day that you had, because I feel like they can be rare sometimes, is that you write down all of the things that went really well. And
Yeah.
if you go back outside and you want to recreate that feeling, all you have to do is reread that entry. Yeah, and it can help you it transports you back to that time.
Yeah.
I think that is like a little secret that not a lot of people know about or even like use to help them get into the right mindset for performance days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also feel like progress is really sneaky, and it compounds. And so I think it's more mastering discipline around knowing when to stop in the gym or when to push yourself. Generally, we learn to chase fatigue, and like the more tired I can get in the next hour, probably the better I'll be at climbing. When really it might be so simple as to really really focus on one specific type of problem or one specific technique you're trying to understand, and you're going to see massive amounts of progress there, and maybe no tangible result of like I sent this really high grade. But if you learn like a better compression technique, or if you can learn to dead point, learn to use the momentum a little bit, get better at getting your feet up high underneath you. All of those things are these amazing skills that can then be leveraged. But if I'm only looking for the grade, I'm going to tend to move to things that I'm really good at, and I'll just try to push my grade really high on like jumpy, juggy roof climbs or something like that, because that's where I know that I'm gonna shine. And so that playing that, one of the real simple techniques is, yes, try the things that you're really great at, but make sure you go back every few sessions and try to shore up the things that you're not good at. It's unacceptable to be bad at any technique in climbing. Slabs, slopers, drop knees, whatever that particular thing is, it's just not okay to not master all of those things. And when it gets to your limit, you've got to have the entire toolbox and ready to go. And you're just not going to be happy if you're constantly seeking out the easiest grade for you in the whole world. I've got to go to this one area because I know that the grading is really soft and the climbing style suits me, and so what we want is to be able to go anywhere in the world. I can climb any V2 no matter what. I can climb any V3 no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's scary, if it's loose, if it's wet. I can do it. And so that's the goal of training, is to shore up all of those leaks.
I wanted to go back to something you had said right at the start of this little spurt that you're talking about, which was that we seem to be motivated or seem to think that we have to be suffering in our training. And so this got me thinking about periodization and programming and what people think it should look like. Let's talk about maybe some of the basic fundamentals of periodization. And preparing for this podcast, I tried to look up where periodization really came from, and I think it came out of like the Soviet training. Like it was more like an Eastern training philosophy, and then came over to the West for competitive athletes.
It was a really, like, the 1950s to the 1980s was a really fascinating time in training programming, because especially the Eastern Bloc countries understood that if they could leverage athletics, it was really great for their national pride, for the belief in the Soviet system, and if they were winning all these gold medals, that was proof that they were with a superior athletic group. And so they put a lot of effort behind figuring out all the pieces of it, better exercise techniques. Of course, like the dark side of it all was supplementation and doping. But programming was a huge piece of it. And so there were these, Hungarian programs, the Romanian programs, that, so-and-so, but there was a guy named Matveyev that wrote a whole text on it. And you can actually find this textbook still, but it basically was this sequential addressing of various qualities, because we understood intuitively that we couldn't just train everything all at once. And so what they did was, they were generally either long to short, meaning we would do endurance and then make it faster and more powerful, and faster and more powerful, and then compete in a power event. Or they would go short to long, where they would start with strength and then go to explosiveness, and then to some power endurance style stuff, then to endurance, and then they would compete in a long event like a marathon or something. And the idea was, I'm going to start out and make this person a really fast sprinter, and then we'll take that same sprinting speed and go out to 400 meters, and then we'll take it on all the way out to the marathon. And although we know that doesn't really work, in practical terms, it did produce positive performance results. And so people then started going like, well, what if we did this instead? And there are a few different ways of organizing training, but the most important part of it is that they were organizing training. And so what we want to look at is what are the things that we can pull, going back to the beginning of our conversation here, what are the things that we can pull forward that you, Mercedes, have a different schedule than I do. You have a different level of experience. You're younger than I am. You have different injuries than I do. What are the commonalities that we can bring into a successful training program? And like chasing, after just like, let's get as tired as possible doesn't really work. And so we both can try to add as much load as we can in specific exercises. We know the general loading parameters for most people to get strong is somewhere in that realm of 2 to 6 repetitions of something, or something that takes less than about 15 seconds to do, like a short boulder problem, or a hangboard set. So we can both do those things despite, maybe you can only train 2 days a week and I can train 4. Despite how much sleep you got, whatever, we all know that those principles are true. And progressive overload is really important. And so understanding that you need to continually ask your body for more in order for it to adapt. And at first, right, you like you said before, is that neurological bit. And then your body's like, whoa, this person's really serious about this. I think I need to make some structural changes. And so we're going to, not only are we responding neurologically, which we can do to almost anything, we're now changing the muscle structure. We may be adding blood flow to that area. We might be changing the way that we metabolize food. And we continue to do these things, and we all sort of adapt those ways. And so those are the things we really want to look at and go, how many times does Mercedes have to do, a specific finger workout addressed at finger strength before we see an improvement or a relatively permanent change in her behavior potential? And that's really what we're looking for with training. I don't care how tired you got doing that. I care how strong you are at the end of it. Mm-hmm. And so that's the essence of periodization, is really being able to control how much work the athlete does at any given phase.
Yeah.
But the week doesn't matter. It's really the number of times I come back and address that thing. There's a great example is the guy that I learned to climb with, my best friend in high school, and I learned to climb together. And so we've both been climbing for the exact same amount of time, in years or days or weeks or whatever. But I've probably climbed 50 times as much as he has. And it's, like I chose to be a full-time rock climber. He chose to do a whole bunch of other sports and have a, more lucrative career, all those sorts of things. But the behavior potential changed because I did so much effort there. It's not just how long we've been doing the thing. So it's an important aspect. 4 weeks doesn't matter. It matters what you do in those 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think I think it's a hard sell for people, though, to stick to something for X amount of sessions. And I still see people kind of like doing the shiny object syndrome. Like I feel like we could say this over and over again and just like, keep your head down, do the work, punch the clock, but it really does seem to get in people's heads that, oh, they're just not doing enough, and they're not doing X, Y, Z. I'm curious for your own training, Steve, since you kind of brought it up a little bit. Was for your own training at some point in your life, did you ever stick to one program for longer than like 8 weeks or 12 weeks?
Well, Charlie Manganello and I talk about this a lot, and it's interesting because we teach a bunch of group fitness classes, and one of the things is, they'll come into the class and they'll be like, pull-ups again. We did pull-ups last week. And we kind of laugh because both of us are capable of doing the same exact training, maybe changing load, but not exercises, sets or reps, for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And so there's like, do you like the training? Like if you hate weight training, you're not going to like really regular, unchanging weight training. But it's like, if we go back to look at climbing, like if I said, Mercedes, let's go to Hueco this week, and then we're going to go to the Red River Gorge, and we're going to go do all these different things. We're going to go all over the place, climbing a new place every single week. You're going to be like, hell yes, I don't care. Or if I said, let's just spend the winter at Hueco, you'd be like, hell yes, I don't care, because you love it so much. And so the variety is a real positive part of it. And we can control for that as long as we are regular in the overload. And so, for example, if you are tired of pull-ups, I might have you do alternating cable pull-downs on single cables. I might have you do dumbbell rows. I might have you do landmine rows. I might have you do TRX pulling. I might have you do pull-ups on rings. I might have you do offset pull-ups on the campus board. But I'm going to have you pull, 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 pull. And I'm going to always try to keep you in that same zone where I'm gaining some strength, right? I'm not going to be playing too much around more reps or sets or dropping loads. We always want to be consistently hitting that same loading thing if I want an adaptation, because that's really what we're looking for. And so I also want to then train your legs and your core and your back and your chest, all of those things in roughly the same intensity zone so that the body knows what to do there. Like if I have you do all kinds of different things, it might make you fatigued, but an improvement in fitness will only be a side effect instead of the actual planned effect of the training. If there was a thing that was a TV fitness program, maybe 20 years ago called P90X, and they talked about this. This whole thing works on the principle of muscle confusion, and
Oh man.
it totally, which didn't really provide the results people were looking for, because it was too random. There are too many random things going into it. And so variety is very useful. Let me change the exercise we're doing, but we need to make sure that we're keeping the important adaptations consistent. And so in my own training, for example, I might switch like the grip on the pull up from a reverse grip to a pistol grip to a regular bar grip to offset with like holding onto a towel. But I'll maybe cycle through those for a month or two and then change into something else and change into something else. But really trying to make those changes very slowly, because I want to see if I can get my system up to this level where I'm like, system, you've got to change. I'm not just going to keep changing what I'm throwing at you, because you'll get I don't even know what a percentage, but a very small percentage of your potential will be realized without specific overload. Mm-hmm. The way, and I don't know if you remember this from when we were teaching the performance climbing coach seminars, but the way I talked to people about it there was we all went, we went to college and we got a bunch of textbooks. And we read all those textbooks in order. I did biology 1 and then biology 2 and then physiology. And I read them page 1, page 2, page 3. But random training would be like tearing all the pages out of those books and then just picking one off the floor randomly and expecting to get the same result as if I had done it in a progressive pattern. And that really landed with the coaches that we were teaching at the time, because they were like, okay, it is important to figure out how to maintain some level of regularity. And so in finance, they call it dollar cost averaging, where you're investing despite what the market is doing. You're just putting your $80 a month in. And that's exactly what we need to do in the training. Despite how I feel, despite if I got, measurably stronger or not, I'm still going to keep hitting these same overloads, because eventually it's going to pay.
Great. Okay. Let's see. Oh. Okay. I'm gonna throw a wrench in this one because I think, like, you were just talking about this, how it's the concept of a move, so a pull up that you could change maybe through the week, but still have that consistent like overload. Mm-hmm. So I was reading about kind of like two main types of training, where you can have a set of, let's just say, the deadlift, bench press, and pull up, and you do that 2 to 3 sessions a week, but the only thing that you change really is the percentage
Mm-hmm.
of what you're lifting. You keep everything else the same, reps and sets. Versus a program that does push, pull, press, but there's a change in the exercise, but also a change in the reps and sets.
Yeah.
So for like maybe bench press, I'm doing 3 sets of 5, but then I go to chest press with dumbbells and I do 2 sets of 10,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. That both will elicit a change, but there's pros and cons to each. And I do think it can come down to personality, like the person who maybe needs more variety.
Yeah.
But something that I notice in climbers is, at least maybe from people that I've talked to, is that there seems to be maybe more of a neurological fatigue associated with climbing, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so, therefore, maybe changing exercises too frequently in this regard, where each session looks a little different each week. This is something I've been thinking about with the neurological fatigue factor. Would it be, or have you seen any benefits to doing the same exact exercises and just changing like the high? I guess I think you've called it high-low training.
Yeah. Well, there's a
Something like
few
that. Yeah.
there's a few different things there. And so the first one, I just made a couple of notes here. The first part is you sort of alluded to this serial versus concurrent training. And so I could either train a bunch of strength and then move in and train a bunch of power endurance, and then I could train a bunch of endurance. And I could do that over the course of 3 weeks each. Or I could do concurrent training where I'm doing each of those things. And I wrote about that in Logical Progression, like a nonlinear thing. Session 1 is strength, session 2 is power, session 3 is endurance, and then we just roll through that sequence.
Yeah.
And so the important thing is both of them work, but the nonlinear bit takes 3 times as long to see the result in my strength. But the really important take home there is if I'm doing strength, power, endurance, I still need to do like 8 or 10 strength sessions before I see an improvement in strength. It's just going to take me 4 months instead of 1 month to see an improvement there. And so that's an important factor, especially the more skill-based our sport, the less we're dependent on strength and conditioning. And so I'm comfortable with people doing a nonlinear style program because I don't need to get gigantic gains in their strength as much as I need them to be decently strong and then have the ability to apply skill and go out and do the sport. But you're totally right. The neurological fatigue can be totally overwhelming, especially if I go super hard, physical, engaging, and potentially nerve-wracking bouldering session, followed by heavy duty lifting, followed by whatever the other life stress that comes into it. And so there's a whole bunch of like, if I'm not feeling great and snappy and happy after a few of these sessions and feeling some amount of energy from it, we've probably got the training off a little bit. The training shouldn't lead you to just feel totally beat down and crappy all the time. You'll occasionally have a crappy session. You'll occasionally be beat down. But if you're just feeling that neurological fatigue, which oftentimes feels lethargic, dull, low psych, all the things that were just like, or a huge decline in performance. Like if you're weaker week 2 after week 1, we messed up. We put too much on you during week 1. Proper training should see us having the slight improvement over time. And there are those that really advocate for digging these deep holes of multi-days on, but for almost all of us, that doesn't work. It has to be so carefully managed that we could just say that it doesn't work. And so I think you're right. Like if it's somebody doesn't respond well to a bunch of overload of strength, trying something like a nonlinear one where we go strength and then endurance can be really good. Joel and I just shot a video about well, we've been doing these videos on energy system stuff, but one of the things that we've got coming out is one on alternating programming, where you do 6 weeks of strength, or excuse me, 6 week program, but 3 weeks of strength, 3 weeks of endurance, and then alternate back and forth between those two. And so we're just going to be alternating. And what's really cool is if you train for strength for 3 weeks, then you can stop training for about 3 weeks, do some endurance, and the strength decline isn't all that profound. And so we can go right back into strength with almost no diminish in strength there. And then when we go back to endurance stays the same. And so we can really go heavy one way, go heavy the other. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat. But the thing that's important is in those 3 weeks of strength, we're still seeing those like 8 to 10 sessions that help us see an improvement. And even if we have to change the exercises a little to keep ourselves entertained, we still need to do that number of sessions. Because if I do a 3-week strength program and I only train once every 10 days, it's not going to work.
So I just want to point out that, so Steve is a certified strength and conditioning coach. So am I. I talked to Juliet Hammer, who's also certified strength and conditioning coach. And what's really interesting is that we don't just think about the strength component. Like, we also program the skill component, which most strength and conditioning coaches don't do.
Yeah.
And I just want to like point out that this is like, it is the art of program design, especially for climbing coaches who have these credentials. There's just so much to think about, you know. And I just want to like, you know, like this job is not super easy, you know, compared to maybe just like, oh, I'm just going to prescribe you sets of reps for your strength. Okay, good luck, you know. It's,
I feel like that's a place where as a coach, I'm being really disingenuous if I downplay the importance of something that I just personally don't know a lot about. Nutrition's a big thing. Like, I minored in nutrition in college, but I don't claim to be a nutritionist. But I understand its importance in performance. I also understand that the mental aspect is gigantic. There's no amount of endurance and strength I can train into my athlete that's going to help them be less afraid, right? And so we need to, if that's a big component, we've got to figure out how to incorporate that into our training. And so all of these things become important aspects. And so then, you and I and Juliet are like, okay, we do need to do some pull-ups, but all the other things too.
Yeah, I always feel like it's such a juggle, you know. I like to focus on the strength component because it's the place I feel the most comfortable, and to me it's the most fun.
Yeah.
And
well, they don't have a 10 deck for fear.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the thing for me. It's like I love to be able to jump on the pull-up bar and go, okay, I'm feeling strong. I can do my normal number of pull-ups here. But that variability of recovery and emotional state and arousal. My son is a cross-country ski racer, and the second day of a 2-day meet, he's like this whole year, he wakes up, he's like, oh man, I've got some kind of stomach bug. I'm not feeling it. I don't think I can race today. Every single time. And you're like, you're not sick. You know, there's something else going on. He's nervous, and he's got a great coach, and the coach worked through it with him. But that aspect of like, it doesn't matter how strong he is or what his endurance is or how well he can ski if he's nervous. And so the coach has to jump into that role as well. And so it's a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I love this job. This job is wonderful.
Yeah. There's always something. I mean, that's the thing, is really being able to identify, you know, something that we can work on and see an improvement in that's going to splash into other areas. I'm doing a program design pre-conference at the CWA next month, and the first exercise in that, let me give it away here. People will be like, oh, I already heard about this. It's not cool. No, but if the first exercise is to bring the athletes in, the coaches or whoever's there, and list out all the things that they need to improve in their climbing. And so, give you 3 minutes. I mean, if you took out a piece of paper right now and wrote down all of the things that the facets, you're like, well, my footwork's no good. Don't know how to knee bar. I'm not good at slopers. I get tired toward the end of the week, and most just your average climber that consumes training media and talks to other climbers is going to come up with 15 to 20 things that they feel like they need to improve to get their climbing going. And so in this exercise, we write down all of those things, and then we cross out all but 2 of them. And then we start to work on those. And that's the essence of good program design, is finding something that you can actually tangibly move forward. Because if I'm trying to move forward all of the possible things that I need to do, I'm just not going to make any kind of progress that's going to feel like I'm getting anywhere. And so that's another one of these things that the coach gets to like go, oh, okay, that's another thing I need to become an expert in.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, we're getting close to the 45-minute mark here. Was there anything else that you can think of to maybe just help folks be more comfortable with sticking through a training program, or just like maybe giving a training program a little bit longer to do its thing?
Well, I think within a specific training program, we need to just track a couple of measures or a couple of exercises or whatever it is. We're going to have you doing leg exercises and core exercises and pulling and whatever else, but stick with a couple of things that you really are the core of that program, and make sure that those are the things that have continuity. Maybe steep climbing isn't your favorite. And so making sure that you have a little bit of climbing on the steepest wall that exists in each of these sessions for a regular amount of time. I'm going to go out the 40-degree moon board at least 2 times, even if it's just on open holds every single session. You can also measure the more tangible things that are more fun, like hangboard numbers, pull-up numbers, a weight on a particular exercise. But really, unless it's something that you need to improve on, I wouldn't make it a major focus of your training. We can just simmer along our ability to do pull-ups, for example. I've seen very, very few climbers that needed more pulling strength. It usually ends up being finger strength in that position or hip strength in that position. But 2 or 3 things that you're like, okay, these are going to be the things that I'm going to give success or fail on this program. And the program does need to be long enough in order to see those results. That's why we have 4-week, 6-week, 8-week programs, is because we have to repeat it often enough that your body learns it.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. I think this is a good place to stop. Thank you so much, Steve. And yeah, so we'll be back. We kind of talked about maybe looking at some research articles and helping listeners kind of understand what these research articles are about, what we can dissect from them, but as coaches, how we can make it more practical. So that could be something you might hear from us in the future. If you have any thoughts about what Steve and I could talk about, please, leave a comment or any ideas that you'd like us to cover. So thanks so much, Steve.
All right. Thanks a lot. So good to talk to you. And I hope we get to talk here really soon.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll catch you in the next one.